The morning sun had barely crept over the sawgrass marshes when the park ranger found the abandoned Honda Civic at the Royal Palm Visitor Center parking lot. It was August 17th, 2009, and the temperature was already climbing toward 95 degrees. The car belonged to 28-year-old Dr. Julian Reeves, an archaeologist from the University of Miami who had told his colleagues he was taking a weekend camping trip to the Everglades. The vehicle sat empty, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. His wallet, phone, and backpack were gone, but his tent and camping gear remained untouched in the trunk. Julian's wife, Rebecca, reported him missing when he failed to return home on Sunday evening. She was 8 months pregnant with their first child, and Julian had promised he would be back in time for her doctor's appointment on Monday morning. He never missed anything important, she told the investigators. He was meticulous, organized, a man who planned every detail of his life with the precision he brought to his excavation sites. The National Park Service launched an immediate search operation. Rangers combed through the cypress swamps and pine flatwoods, calling his name until their voices grew hoarse. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the endless expanse of sawgrass that stretched toward the horizon like a golden-green ocean. Search dogs tracked his scent from the parking lot to the edge of Anhinga Trail, then lost it completely near the freshwater slough. It was as if Julian had simply dissolved into the humid Florida air. Before we continue with Julian's story, if you're enjoying this mystery, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's dive deeper into what happened next. Detective Michael Ortega from Miami-Dade Police was assigned to the case. He had worked missing persons for 17 years, and something about Julian's disappearance troubled him from the start. The young archaeologist had no history of mental illness, no financial problems, no marital issues. He was about to become a father. Why would he walk away from his life? Ortega interviewed Julian's colleagues at the university, and they all described him as passionate about his work, particularly his research into ancient Mesoamerican structures that had been discovered in the southeastern United States. Rebecca sat across from Ortega in her living room, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice remained steady. "He called me Friday night from the park," she said. "He sounded excited about something. He said he'd found an interesting geological formation near the Pa-hay-okee Overlook, something that didn't match the typical limestone substrate of the area. He wanted to photograph it before the light changed." She paused, swallowing hard. "That was the last time I heard his voice." Ortega requested Julian's phone records. The last ping from his cell tower placed him near the Pa-hay-okee Overlook at 7:43 p.m. on Friday, August 14th. After that, nothing. The detective drove out to the overlook himself, a wooden platform that rose above the sawgrass prairie, offering panoramic views of the seemingly endless wetland. He stood there as the sun set, watching shadows lengthen across the marsh, and wondered what Julian had seen that evening, what had captured his attention so completely that he'd ventured off the marked trails. The search continued for 3 weeks. Dive teams explored the deeper sloughs, where alligators lurked beneath the tannin-stained water. Volunteers walked grid patterns through the mangrove forests near the coast, checking every hammock and tree island. They found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no trace of the missing archaeologist. The Everglades had swallowed him whole, and as September arrived with its afternoon thunderstorms, the official search was suspended. Julian Reeves became another name on the list of people who had vanished in America's vast wilderness areas. Rebecca gave birth to their daughter Lily on September 12, 2009. She held the baby in her arms at the hospital and wept, knowing that Julian would never meet their child, but she refused to give up hope. While others whispered that her husband must have drowned in a slough or been attacked by an alligator, Rebecca insisted that Julian was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. She hired private investigators who followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. They interviewed airboat tour guides, park volunteers, locals who lived on the edge of the wetlands. No one had seen him. The years passed slowly. Lily grew from infant to toddler to child, always asking questions about the father she'd never known. Rebecca kept Julian's study exactly as he'd left it, books on pre-Columbian architecture stacked on his desk, maps of archaeological sites pinned to the walls, his coffee mug still sitting beside his computer keyboard. She celebrated his birthday every year, lighting candles on a cake that no one would eat, refusing to let his memory fade. Detective Ortega never closed the case file. Even after he retired from Miami-Dade Police in 2018, he kept a copy of Julian's file at home. He would take it out sometimes, late at night, and review the evidence again, searching for something he might have missed. The case haunted him because it made no sense. People didn't just disappear without leaving some trace behind, but Julian Reeves had done exactly that. In early 2024, 15 years after Julian vanished, an extraordinary discovery was made nearly 3,000 miles away in Egypt. An international team of archaeologists working at a little-known pyramid complex south of Cairo announced they had located a sealed chamber within a Fourth Dynasty structure. The pyramid, smaller and less famous than those at Giza, had been explored multiple times over the past century, but advanced scanning technology had recently revealed an anomaly, a void that shouldn't exist according to the known architectural plans. Dr. Christina Lambert, the lead archaeologist on the project, secured permission from Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities to open the sealed chamber. She assembled a team of experts, and on March 8, 2024, they carefully removed the limestone blocks that had concealed the entrance for more than 4,000 years. The chamber was small, only about 12 feet by 15 feet, with walls covered in hieroglyphs. The air that rushed out when they breached the seal was dry and ancient, untouched by the outside world for millennia. What they found inside shocked everyone present. In the center of the chamber, lying on the stone floor, was the body of a modern man. He was dressed in khaki hiking pants and a faded blue t-shirt with a University of Miami logo. His backpack lay beside him, along with a camera, water bottles, and a notebook. The body was remarkably well preserved due to the chamber's dry, sealed environment, but the truly astonishing detail was the man's identification. In his wallet, investigators found a Florida driver's license belonging to Dr. Julian Reeves. The discovery sent shockwaves through both the archaeological and law enforcement communities. How could a man who disappeared in the Florida Everglades in 2009 end up inside a sealed Egyptian pyramid? The chamber had been closed for thousands of years. Multiple layers of limestone blocks, undisturbed mortar, no signs of forced entry or modern disturbance. Yet there he was, impossible and undeniable. Egyptian authorities immediately contacted the FBI and Miami-Dade Police. Detective Ortega, now 71 years old and long retired, received a phone call from his former partner that he initially thought was a cruel joke. They found Julian Reeves, his partner said, in Egypt, inside a pyramid. Ortega sat down heavily in his kitchen chair, the phone pressed to his ear, unable to process what he was hearing. Rebecca flew to Egypt within 48 hours, accompanied by her 15-year-old daughter Lily and a team of American forensic specialists. The Egyptian government granted them permission to view the chamber and examine the remains. Rebecca stood at the entrance to the sealed room, looking at the man who had been her husband, and felt her knees buckle. Lily held her mother's hand, staring at the father she'd never known, trying to understand the impossibility before her. The forensic examination confirmed the body's identity through dental records and DNA analysis. It was definitely Julian Reeves. But the circumstances of his death raised more questions than answers. There were no signs of trauma, no indication of how he might have died. The expression on his face was peaceful, almost serene. His notebook contained pages of observations about the Everglades, notes about geological formations, sketches of unusual limestone patterns, calculations about underground water flow. Dr. Lambert and her team conducted extensive tests on the chamber's seal. Multiple laboratories analyzed the mortar, the stone blocks, the dust patterns. Every test confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The chamber had been continuously sealed for approximately 4,000 years. There was no modern tunnel, no hidden entrance, no way that Julian could have entered the space after the ancient Egyptians sealed it. Yet the evidence of his presence was irrefutable. The investigation expanded to include specialists in geology, physics, and archaeology from universities around the world. They examined the pyramid's construction, searching for any anomaly that might explain the impossible presence of a modern man in an ancient tomb. Some theorized about unknown passages or chambers that might have connected to modern structures, but extensive scanning found nothing. The pyramid was solid limestone, built with the precision and skill typical of the Fourth Dynasty, with no structural modifications made in the millennia since its construction. Julian's camera contained photographs that added another layer to the mystery. The memory card held images from his Friday evening in the Everglades, sunset over the sawgrass prairie, close-ups of unusual limestone formations, several shots of what appeared to be a small opening in the ground near Pa-hay-okee Overlook. The last photograph, time-stamped at 7:52 p.m. on August 14, 2009, showed the interior of what looked like a limestone cave or tunnel. The walls were smooth, almost artificially so, and covered with markings that resembled ancient symbols. A specialized team from the National Park Service returned to Pa-hay-okee Overlook, armed with ground-penetrating radar and other detection equipment. They searched the area where Julian's phone had last pinged, looking for the opening he'd photographed. They found evidence of a limestone sinkhole that had collapsed sometime in 2009, based on vegetation growth patterns and soil analysis. The sinkhole had filled in naturally over the years, covered by sediment and plant growth. When they excavated the site, they discovered a vertical shaft descending about 40 feet into the limestone bedrock, then ending abruptly. There was no tunnel, no passage, no connection to anything. Rebecca spent weeks in Egypt, refusing to leave until she understood what had happened to her husband. She sat in the hotel room at night, reading Julian's notebook over and over, searching for clues. His final entries described his fascination with the limestone formation he'd discovered. He'd written, "The stone here doesn't match the typical Everglades geology. It's older, denser, with a composition similar to samples I've seen from Mediterranean quarries. Tomorrow I'll bring proper equipment and take core samples. This could be significant." The Egyptian investigation interviewed local workers who had been involved in previous excavations at the pyramid. An elderly man named Ahmed Hassan, who had worked at the site in the 1960s and again in the 1990s, mentioned something that had been dismissed as rumor. He said that when he was a young man, his grandfather had told him stories about the pyramid having windows to other places that the ancient priests could use to travel vast distances. The old man insisted these weren't metaphorical windows, but actual portals connected to sacred sites around the world. The archaeologists had laughed at the stories, but Ahmed remembered them. Dr. Lambert reviewed the hieroglyphs covering the chamber walls. Most were standard funerary texts, prayers for the deceased, lists of offerings. But one section, near the ceiling above where Julian's body had been found, contained unusual symbols that didn't match typical Fourth Dynasty writing. When a specialist in ancient Egyptian languages analyzed them, she found references to doorways through stone and paths that fold distance. The texts suggested that this particular chamber had served a special ceremonial function, though its exact purpose remained unclear. The scientific community was divided. Most researchers insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps the chamber hadn't been truly sealed, or perhaps the dating methods were flawed. But the evidence was overwhelming and had been verified by multiple independent laboratories. A small number of scientists began to consider possibilities that challenged conventional understanding of physics and archaeology. They pointed to Julian's photographs, his notes about unusual limestone, the strange hieroglyphs in the chamber. Was it possible that ancient peoples had understood something about the nature of stone and earth that modern science had yet to rediscover? Media coverage of the case exploded worldwide. The story of the archaeologist who vanished in the Everglades and appeared in an Egyptian pyramid captured public imagination. Theories ranged from the scientific to the fantastic. Some suggested quantum tunneling effects, others proposed unknown geological phenomena. Skeptics insisted on conspiracy and hoax, though they couldn't explain how such an elaborate deception could have been executed. The case file grew to thousands of pages as investigators from multiple countries contributed their findings. Rebecca and Lily returned to Miami in late April 2024, bringing Julian's remains home for burial. The funeral was held on May 3rd, 15 years and 8 months after he disappeared. Hundreds of people attended: colleagues, former students, park rangers who had searched for him, Detective Ortega and his former partners. Rebecca stood beside the grave with Lily at her side, finally able to say goodbye to the man she'd loved. But closure brought little comfort. The question of how and why this had happened continued to consume her thoughts. In the months following Julian's burial, Rebecca began organizing his research papers and notes. She discovered that he'd been investigating reports of unusual limestone formations throughout the southeastern United States, places where the geology didn't match the surrounding area, where the stone composition suggested origins in distant lands. He'd documented 17 such sites in Florida alone and had been planning a research proposal to study them systematically. The formation he'd found near Pa-hay-okee Overlook was the 18th. Dr. Lambert remained in contact with Rebecca, sharing updates as the Egyptian team continued analyzing the chamber. They'd found microscopic particles in the dust on the floor, traces of sawgrass pollen, dried algae species native to the Everglades, and mineral compositions that matched the unique chemistry of South Florida's wetlands. Somehow, the sealed chamber had contained air and materials from the Everglades, despite being thousands of miles away and closed for millennia. The implications were staggering. Lily became obsessed with understanding what had happened to her father. As she prepared to enter college, she declared her intention to study archaeology and geology, following in Julian's footsteps. Rebecca supported her daughter's choice, though it pained her to imagine Lily pursuing the same questions that had led Julian to his inexplicable fate. The girl had inherited her father's curiosity and determination, qualities that couldn't be discouraged even when they led down dangerous paths. A year after the discovery, in March 2025, an international conference was held in Cairo to discuss the case. Scientists, archaeologists, physicists, and geologists gathered to present their findings and theories. No consensus emerged. The evidence was clear and had been verified beyond any reasonable doubt, but no one could explain it. Julian Reeves had disappeared from the Florida Everglades in 2009 and somehow ended up inside an Egyptian pyramid that had been sealed for 4,000 years. The laws of physics as currently understood didn't allow for this, yet it had happened. Detective Ortega attended the conference, traveling to Egypt at age 72 to finally see the chamber where Julian had been found. He stood in that small stone room, running his hand along the hieroglyphs, and thought about all the missing persons cases he'd worked over the decades. Most had reasonable explanations: accidents, violence, people choosing to disappear. But some cases defied explanation, leaving holes in the fabric of understanding that could never be filled. Julian's case was the ultimate mystery. proof that the world contained unknowns that might never be known. Rebecca created a foundation in Julian's memory, dedicated to supporting research into unexplained disappearances and unusual geological phenomena. She used the life insurance money and donations from people fascinated by her husband's story. The foundation funded studies of the limestone formations Julian had been investigating, hoping to understand what he'd discovered in those final hours before he vanished. Several researchers reported finding similar anomalies, stones that seemed out of place, compositions that didn't match their surroundings. The chamber in Egypt became something of a pilgrimage site, though access was strictly controlled. People came from around the world, drawn by the mystery, hoping to glimpse the place where the impossible had occurred. Egyptian authorities eventually decided to seal the chamber again, preserving it exactly as it had been found. Dr. Lambert supervised the resealing, using modern materials that future archaeologists would be able to distinguish from ancient work. Before the final blocks were set in place, she placed a plaque inside the chamber commemorating Julian Reeves and the enduring mystery of his death. Lily graduated from high school in 2025 and enrolled at the University of Miami, the same institution where her father had taught. She moved into his old office, which the university had preserved as a memorial. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by his books and maps, she felt close to the father she'd never known. She began her studies with fierce determination, driven by questions that might never be answered, but had to be asked nonetheless. The scientific papers continued to be published. Geologists documented the unusual limestone formations Julian had been studying, finding patterns that suggested ancient connections between distant sites. Physicists proposed theoretical frameworks that might allow for the kind of spatial displacement suggested by the evidence, though none could be proven. Archaeologists examined other sealed chambers around the world, wondering what else might be hidden inside structures thought to have been thoroughly explored. Rebecca still keeps Julian's study exactly as he left it. Now 20 years have passed since that August morning when his car was found in the Everglades parking lot, 16 since his body was discovered in Egypt. She's 63 now, her hair grey, her face lined with the years of grief and wonder. Lily is a graduate student pursuing her doctorate in geoarchaeology, following the threads of her father's research. Together they visit his grave every month, bringing flowers and sharing updates on the ongoing investigations. Detective Ortega passed away in December 2026 at age 74. His obituary mentioned his 40-year career in law enforcement and specifically highlighted the Julian Reeves case as his most challenging investigation. At his funeral, Rebecca spoke about how Ortega had never given up, how he'd kept searching for answers even after retirement. His dedication had given her hope during the darkest years, and she would always be grateful for his refusal to let Julian become just another forgotten missing person. The Everglades continues to draw visitors who want to see where Julian disappeared. Park rangers lead groups to Pa-hay-okee Overlook and tell the story of the archaeologist who vanished there and appeared in an Egyptian pyramid. The site where the limestone sinkhole was found is marked with a simple bronze plaque. Dr. Julian Reeves, 1981-2009. He sought understanding and found mystery. People stand there in the heat, looking out over the sawgrass prairie, and wonder about the secrets hidden beneath the earth. The Egyptian chamber remains sealed, its mysteries preserved for future generations. Dr. Lambert published a comprehensive monograph documenting every aspect of the investigation, a 1,000-page volume that has become essential reading for anyone studying anomalous archaeology. She included Julian's photographs, his notes, the forensic reports, the geological analyses. The book ends with a simple statement. Some questions cannot be answered with current knowledge. That does not make them less real. Rebecca published Julian's notebook in 2028, along with his research papers and photographs. The book became a bestseller, not because it provided answers, but because it documented questions worth asking. Readers were moved by Julian's passion for discovery, his careful observations, his excitement about the limestone formation he'd found. The final page of the notebook, written the day before he disappeared, contained one sentence. "Tomorrow I explore deeper. I think I'm onto something important." Lily completed her dissertation in 2034, 25 years after her father vanished. Her research examined the network of unusual limestone formations Julian had been studying, using modern scanning technology and geological analysis. She discovered that many of these sites contained trace elements, suggesting they'd once been connected to distant locations: stones from the Mediterranean in Florida, North American minerals in European caves, inexplicable mixtures that defied conventional geology. Her work opened new questions about Earth's geological history and the possibility of natural phenomena not yet understood by science. The case file remains open in Miami-Dade police records, marked as solved, deceased located, but annotated with circumstances unexplained. New detectives sometimes pull the file out of curiosity, reading through the evidence, trying to find what everyone else missed. They never do. The case is what it appears to be: impossible but true, a reminder that the world contains depths of strangeness that elude explanation. Rebecca is 80 years old now, living in the same house she shared with Julian all those years ago. His study remains unchanged, a shrine to curiosity and the unknown. She sits there sometimes in the evenings, reading his notebook, looking at his photographs of the Everglades sunset, and feeling his presence. She never remarried, never even considered it. Julian was her only love, and the manner of his death, strange and impossible, somehow feels fitting for a man who spent his life exploring mysteries. The world has moved on, but some people still remember. Every year on August 14th, the anniversary of Julian's disappearance, a small group gathers at Pa-hay-okee Overlook. Rebecca and Lily, former colleagues, students whose lives he touched, people fascinated by his story. They stand together as the sun sets over the sawgrass prairie, watching the light fade exactly as Julian must have watched it that final evening. They don't speak much. What is there to say about a mystery that can never be solved? A question that can never be answered? The foundation Rebecca created continues its work, funding research into unexplained phenomena and supporting families of missing persons. Hundreds of cases have been investigated, some solved, most remaining mysteries. Julian's case stands apart, unique in its impossible resolution. He was found, but in finding him, a greater mystery emerged. Perhaps that would have pleased him, the archaeologist who sought to understand the past and instead discovered that the present contained depths beyond comprehension. Lily teaches at the University of Miami now, occupying the same position her father once held. She tells her students about Julian's work, his discoveries, his final investigation. She teaches them to ask questions without assuming all questions can be answered, to embrace mystery without abandoning reason. The world is stranger than we imagine, she tells them, and sometimes we encounter evidence of that strangeness in ways that challenge everything we think we know. The pyramid in Egypt stands as it has for 4,000 years, weathered by wind and sun, holding its secrets close. Inside, in a chamber no living person can now access, a bronze plaque commemorates the man who appeared there from across the world and across the centuries. The hieroglyphs on the walls speak of doorways through stone, of paths that fold distance, of mysteries the ancients understood and we have forgotten. Whether those ancient texts hold literal truth or metaphorical meaning, no one can say with certainty. But Julian Reeves proved that impossible things can happen, that reality contains possibilities beyond our current understanding. On quiet nights in South Florida, when the air is thick with humidity and the sawgrass whispers in the darkness, Rebecca stands on her back porch and looks toward the Everglades. Somewhere out there, beneath the limestone and water, beneath the endless prairie and cypress swamps, lies the place where her husband stepped from one world into another. She doesn't understand it, doesn't pretend to, but she knows that Julian found something real that August evening, something that connected distant places through stone and earth and time. He was always seeking connections, always looking for patterns that others missed. In the end, he found the ultimate connection, the impossible bridge between here and there, then and now. The case of Julian Reeves remains one of the most documented and verified mysteries in modern history. Thousands of pages of scientific reports, forensic analyses, and archaeological studies tell a story that defies explanation but cannot be dismissed. A man vanished in the Everglades and appeared in an Egyptian pyramid sealed for 4,000 years. The evidence is irrefutable, the explanation is absent, and in that absence lies a truth more profound than any answer, that the world we inhabit is far stranger, far more mysterious, far more wonderful than our sciences have yet revealed. Julian Reeves discovered that truth, and in doing so became part of a mystery that will endure as long as people wonder about the unknown spaces between what we know and what we cannot possibly understand.